Can we start by talking about employee and employer and the kind of dynamics that go on from both sides there?
Sure. I mean, just to give a bit of a context to our discussion about relationships, I think it's important just to put it on the table that relationships. I mean, it's how a relationship is just how we relate to other people. A person can have so many faculties that if they're on their own, if they're insular, that are not tested, that are not triggered. Faculties like attention and concentration, memory, determination, drive, creativity, all these things. A person can have talents and abilities, but if they're not around other people, so they're never tested and they're never triggered. There's something about being with other people in a relationship, whether it's employer-employee, whether it's spousal relationship, whether any sort of partnership, friendship, parent and child. I was just saying it's important to recognize that relationships trigger other people, trigger you. When a person is with another person, so everything comes out. So the point I'm making is that when it comes to relationships, even though you want to examine in different spheres, different areas of relationships, at the end of the day, there is a common denominator that's a thread that's woven through every relationship, and that is who you are and what triggers you, the issues that you're dealing with, whether it's anger, whether it's a need for control, or whether it's insecurity. They're going to manifest and they're going to come out in every single relationship. So it's very rare that someone has positive relationships and has in their life and then has very negative relationships. It just doesn't happen. Unless, for example, you're speaking about employer-employee, unless it's very one-sided. Unless, let's say, someone who's an employee is a very dedicated, committed, loyal employee and just has a boss who's exploitative and manipulative. And that can happen. Of course, one of the dangers when it comes to money, if someone feels that they're paying you, if an employer feels, if I feel I'm paying someone, there is the tendency to feel that if I'm paying you, then I want to squeeze everything I can from you. I want you to work as hard as you can and to be as committed as you can. And there often is the challenge when it comes to any employer, a bit like the goose that lays the golden eggs. The desire that you want to squeeze as much as you can from the goose, that you end up, I think it's one of the fables. Aesop's fables is that you just end up killing the goose because you want to extract the egg and you realize you killed the goose. So obviously a clever employer is going to have a more of a long-term perspective in terms of working with their employee. Often these things are built into legalities now and in contracts, but there is still that remnant of a tendency that if an employer is employing someone, then they own them, and therefore they can be freer with how they treat them, how they speak to them, what they say to them, the respect that they give them. It takes a high-quality employer to be able to treat his employee with respect and to trust him. So I would say in terms of challenges, that would be something that's, obviously there are books written about this, seminars about this, but something that's important to bear in mind if you're an employee and you're listening to this is that there is that tendency. Again, it could be a subtle tendency. Obviously, your hands are bound by contract and legalities, but how respectful are you as an employer to your employee? At the same time, as an employee, the challenge of being an employee is working hard and not wanting to exploit your employer. It's very easy when you're working for someone to think about how you can duplicate this if you see them being successful, how I can create and start my own organization. How I can do my own thing. So I would say bottom line is the air the employer and employee have to breathe is one of trust. And trust is really a thread that's woven through every relationship. I would say it's the basic building block of any healthy relationship is trust. If there's no trust, then any relationship can't exist. It's almost like the aleph base. It's the ABC of any healthy relationship. And just talking about that in terms of healthy relationships, what's interesting is there's no litmus test, there's no blood test that one can take for psychological health. we don't know. When it comes to physical health, a person can have a blood test, you can have an X-ray, you can have an MRI. When it comes to psychological health, it's very difficult to gauge someone's psychological health. But one thing I would say is a bit of a litmus test, and that is how they function in relationships. And the reason for that is because trust is such an indicator of a healthy personality. If you can trust someone, or if someone can trust you, so that says a lot about you.
To what extent do you think that an employee owes loyalty to their employer? I mean, surely that has its limits.
Yeah, of course, it's a fine line, and obviously, an employee can't be so loyal that he lays himself vulnerable to being exploited by the employer. But part of being an employee is the understanding that he's loyal. It's a yeah. These things are very they're subtle, and obviously they change and fluctuate from situation and from person to person. But loyalty is an understanding that you're paying me money, and therefore I'm going to do the best I can. Obviously, I mean, one of the challenges nowadays with technology that people can be available anytime, any time of the day, is a real challenge. And obviously, any employee has to set boundaries. There have to be boundaries that are set, and it has to be understood. Otherwise, it's just they're laying themselves open to be exploited.
And you've spoken about what sort of should be the perspective of an employer and an employee. But what about when one party isn't treating the other fairly, and let's just say it's not on the cards for the employer to be able to, sack the employee, or for the employee to leave the job with the employer. It's just not possible at that time, or it's they can tolerate it enough, but it's very difficult. Let's just say there's some level of abusiveness, which can happen, on both sides, the employer to the employee, but also the employee can really try and power play with the employer, because they can say, I'm indispensable, or whatever that is. You've surely had experience seeing this kind of thing happen. What do you say when those kind of things take place?
I mean, it's a real challenge just because finances are at place. Once finances are at stake, so then people are vulnerable on both sides, both employers and employees. Abuse is something that's very subtle and very easy to happen, and it can almost creep up on a person. Abuse is not something necessarily that's blatant.
How do you define abuse?
Be subtle. What? Sorry.
How do you define abuse?
Abuse is something where, I mean, again, there's full-scale abuse where people are being psychologically or emotionally or physically being hurt. But abuse, I would say, is when one is being taken advantage of, where either the employer or employee, where someone's being taken advantage of in some way. Now, obviously, there's no hard and fast rules. It can be something that can take place every so often. It's something. An abusive relationship is definitely something that can happen even once. Abuse can happen on a one-time event. A person can feel abused if he feels hurt, if he feels that someone. These things are complex, and that's why there are tribunals and there are courts that are set up to deal with this and to analyze and to understand it. It's very hard to talk about these things on one leg, but an abuse is, it could be people who are sensitive. An employee can be very sensitive, and it could be an employer is not being abusive. But I would say that there is an objective handbook of how to treat people, objective, basic derech eretz. Basic etiquette of just how to treat people, and once that line is crossed, then potentially, I mean, just to be hurtful to someone doesn't mean there is also as well office banter. There's office banter, and that can easily become abusive. But people, I would say, people know if they're being abused or not, or if they're being abusive. people, human beings know. It's not a surprise. So again, it's hard to define, but I would say consistent negative behavior towards someone in a way that's hurtful.
Right, right. And again, how you're saying there's not much people can do sometimes, but what can people do to help protect themselves? Or do you usually recommend where they feel there's a lot at stake in terms of their job or their business, better to confront or better to just ignore, keep calm and carry on?
Well, there's often can be collateral damage. An employee or an employer has a family. When they come home at the end of their workday, they bring their work with them. If they have an abusive relationship at work, so they're going to bring that home to their spouse and to their family. The slamming the door, the kicking the cat, that sort of a thing. These are so no one lives in a vacuum, and if they don't have a family, they've got friends. So abuse has an impact, a bit like any contagious disease. It impacts other people, and everyone is affected when someone is in a bad mood or upset or hurt people, as they say, hurt others. So it's one of the challenges of abuse is that it often can have, particularly if there is a manipulative personality involved, is that abuse can happen very subtly. It can take place, especially if someone is a skilled manipulator. And there are personalities around, of course, where people are narcissistic or manipulative and can take advantage of people. They like taking advantage of people, and they enjoy that. They enjoy exercising the control and power over another human being, and they know they're skilled at doing this. They know how to do this. This can happen subtly with words and getting people to commit to certain things and doing certain things. And when someone looks back over a period of time, they suddenly realize that they're in an abusive relationship. And I think that's an important thing to bear in mind, is that abuse doesn't suddenly just happen. There's a statement in the Talmud I think is very insightful here. It says, this is the way of the evil inclination. The evil inclination, right? It's Talmudic understanding or Talmudic context that every human being is battling with insanity on some level and with struggles of life, whether it's procrastination or laziness or desire that he can't control, some sort of area of self-control. And the Talmud says this is the modus operandi of how the evil inclination works. It says, today I'll make a person do this, and tomorrow a person will take this small step. And finally, eventually, he'll worship idols, which is sort of the ultimate sin. But the idea is that things happen step by step. These subtle, nuanced exercise of control and power can grab a person before they know it. They're in the grip of it. It's the subtlety. It's the step by step. And before a person knows it, he realizes that he's involved in an abusive relationship. And sometimes people don't know they're in an abusive relationship. Often people don't know what's bothering them. They can't put their finger on it. There's something about their boss that just bothers them, just rubs them up the wrong way. People are not necessarily psycho-savvy. They don't understand the dynamics of what's happening, but they're feeling pain, they're feeling hurt, they're feeling taken advantage of. It's feeling exploited.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we've covered sort of the key points that people have to bear in mind, both as employers and employees. And I think, one of the take-home points that you're making is that that it sounds like you can't. It's very difficult to just accept, an abusive relationship and maintain in the long term and maintain a healthy state of mind and have other healthy relationships, because you're saying it trickles into all areas of life. So when those things happen, you want to try and get out as fast as possible.
Yeah. Even though just to add to that, and one of the thing that fuels the strength of someone who can exploit in an employer-employee relationship is they realize, let's say, the employee or the employer need them financially, depend upon them. Once there's dependence, then and I think this is a key to remember, because it's different than all other relationships. Once there's dependency, then that's fertile ground for abuse to take place, because a person's dependent upon you. He's going to allow, or he or she is going to allow a lot more abuse to happen, and willing to take a lot more. I think it's an important, and that's one of the reasons why it can be possibly more common in employment relationships.
Yeah, yeah. And it sounds like your general advice is, when there's dependence and abuse, do whatever you can to end the dependence, basically.
Yeah, for sure. It's not necessarily always possible, but I think one needs a mentor. I think in terms of, if we're looking for advice, take-home advice, is that one always has to have someone outside that they can check in with, just to make sure, objective. Is this okay? What's happening to me? I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable with this relationship. Is this how a boss should treat an employee? Is this how an employee should be treating his boss? Is this okay? One can't. Yeah, one needs someone to check in to get objective, healthy outside calibration.
Absolutely. So that was great. To stay up to date with JTV content, click subscribe here if you're on YouTube, and hit the alarm bell. And if you're on Facebook, hit the like button, and under following, click see first. If you enjoy watching JTV content and want to help us continue to grow, please consider making a donation to us by clicking here.